Hi everyone, my name's Dr. Anna Ridgewell and I'm a research fellow at the University of Sussex, and I'm going to talk today about some of my doctoral research and specifically the participatory methodology Photovoice that I used and how it helped me to produce what I refer to as richly detailed fragments of children's everyday encounters within the natural spaces of mainstream education and early years childcare. So my project was called the Growing Up Green Project, and it addressed whether children can have meaningful nature engagement in primary schools or nurseries, given various challenges of recent years. So I'm thinking about things such as the impact of the legacy of austerity, such as degrading school and nursery estates, staff retention problems, budget cuts, etc. And then also what has been referred to within the sociology of education as the neoliberal policy incursion into education. So things such as packed curriculums, placing more of an emphasis on sort of traditional subjects and leaving less room for arts-based creative areas, high stakes testing, and performativity and accountability agendas, which are putting a strain on practitioners. So I had two key questions, which were what restrictions or enablers to accessing outdoor environments do children experience in these settings, and what value is placed on outdoor environments in schools and nurseries by both the children attending and the adults who work there. So I worked with four settings. One was a day nursery, one was a charitable play centre, one was a community infant school, a state school, and one was an independent or a private pre-prep school. And I worked with children who were aged 3 to 6 years old. So historically, there has been quite a restrictive lens in much of the existing work around this area, looking at children's nature engagement within schools and nurseries. So a lot of the work that focuses on how practitioners feel about working in the outdoors when they're in these spaces refers mainly to the practical barriers that they experience, such as time restraints, safety concerns, cost, their knowledge or lack of. And I felt that in the course of my work, I came to feel that maybe this risk drawing the focus away from the change that needs to happen at those kind of higher levels. It needs to be enacted at institutional and political levels. And then similarly, a lot of the work with the children around nature engagement in schools and nurseries has tended to focus on kind of quite anthropocentric constructions such as behavioural health, well-being, or pedagogical benefits of the children accessing the outdoors. And that potentially risks ignoring those really important felt dimensions of engaging with natural spaces and helping us to consider how human and planetary health are really deeply interlinked. So I began to think, well, what about the ideological influences at work that are impacting whether children are accessing these spaces? And what about that really important experiential side of nature engagement in education? What about that side that moves engagement beyond just simply the what we can benefit, how humans can benefit from engaging with natural spaces? So, in order to help me explore this experiential side of things with the children, which is what I'm going to talk about today, I wanted to use a participatory method, and so I decided to use Photovoice. So, for those who don't know, very briefly, Photovoice is a method that allows participants to take photographs themselves of things that they are interested in or that the research is referring to. And then the photographs are used by the participants and the researcher to facilitate discussion around things that maybe need to change within the different communities that the researcher is working in. So I worked with children in schools and nurseries. I gave each of the children an iPad, and we went on walks around the outside spaces of their schools and nurseries. And it was very much directed and by the children. They took photographs themselves of the outdoor spaces of their schools and nurseries. And I then took those photographs and printed them up and took them back to the schools and the nurseries about a week or two later. And then I held workshops with the same children, and they selected their favourite photographs that they wanted to speak to, and then they formed the basis of the discussion around what it was that they valued in their natural outdoor spaces. So the reason I decided to use Photovoice was because participatory informed methods can help to elicit these really rich data sets from groups of people who have historically been spoken for by others. So in the case of children, they have historically been seen as research objects, or have been spoken for by the adults who are caring for them. So it was a way of trying to really empower the children and give them a certain amount of agency within the research process. And listening to children often ignores the embodied everyday experiences that they have within different spaces. So using Photovoice was a way of helping to try and create understandings that take in the sense of actions as they unfold over time. It really cultivated the children to become expert researchers of their own lives because, like I say, it was very much directed by the children. And it also helped to facilitate this sort of slow research ethic, which allowed detail and nuance to be noticed and documented by the children. Things were photographed and talked about by them that I wouldn't necessarily have picked up on or asked them to talk about if I had just been doing, say, standard sort of interviews with them, for example. However, Photovoice does come with a certain set of challenges as well. Photographic methods, photographs can be really easy to assemble, but the sheer volume of complex data can be really hard to assimilate. So some of the children I worked with took many photographs, like tens of photographs, and obviously this could then be an issue trying to kind of assimilate those, and it could be quite overwhelming to begin with. It's also really important to remember that digital photographs, particularly digital photographs, are sort of specific selections created from many possibilities. They can't be claimed as being a singular, authentic reflection of social reality. They are just, one moment in time. They exclude and they frame what we can see in nearby surroundings. So it's really important to not try and claim that there's a sort of single authentic voice waiting to emerge via the metaphor of the image. And that's why it's really important to use a reflexive and dynamic analytic approach that attends closely to these embodied everyday encounters that are being sort of reflected through the images and the talk of the children. And to attend closely to these sort of everyday encounters within nature to try and offer a richly phenomenologically descriptive account. So, in order to help me try and think through what this meant in terms of my analysis, I came up with this metaphorical framework, which I refer to as the starry sky metaphor. So, the idea for this, I was inspired by an Indigenous researcher whose surname was Star Blanket. She's called Gina Star Blanket. And I read some of her stuff when I was writing my work up. And the idea for this is that it's a metaphor to help me understand how the different elements of the analytic framework come together. So in this metaphor, the reflexive thematic analysis, which I used to do my analysis, forms the always active atmosphere that unifies and holds together all of the different elements. The epistemological and ontological theories formed the sky. So I was very informed by social constructionism, new materialism, critical realism. They're like the kind of background horizon of the whole enterprise. So they might not necessarily be in the forefront of your mind when you're doing the analysis, but they're there in the background, kind of lending a coherence and an authenticity. Then the smaller key concepts form these stars, which, although they're really enmeshed and entangled with the sky, shine out, and they help to bring a glowing clarity to the work. And I've kind of just pinpointed a few of the concepts here that I was personally informed by, things such as a small n neoliberalism, kinship, risk, ecological belonging and care, etc. And then I've also done some other sort of outlines of stars, and that's really to show that when we look up at a starry sky, we only see those stars, shapes, and patterns that glow the brightest on a particular night. But we also know that there are many, many more, billions more stars in the universe that are unobservable to the human eye. And this really speaks to me, is what I'm trying to kind of get across with this metaphor. It speaks to me as how there are many other possible ideas and concepts that could drive the direction of the analysis, and how personal the work of a qualitative researcher is. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's no one singular truth. This is my interpretation of this data, and it's informed by a much wider context. My own partial knowledge, my own politics, my own assumptions. And the starry sky metaphor really helps me in the telling of this story. So, Photovoice and the accompanying reflexive thematic analysis that I refer to here really allowed me to attempt to understand the work with the children in terms of their development within systems of collective relational belonging, which I would not have done if I'd just asked them questions, which may have conformed to a sort of more dualist perspective of an implicit nature-culture divide. But similarly, this framework also helped me to understand the work with the practitioners through this kind of sociological lens, and thinking about these concepts such as the nature as romantic commodity and the small n neoliberalism at work within education and childcare. So I'm now going to just move on to talk about some of these fragments that I was able to build up from this work with the children and through the Photovoice method. So this was from the private school, and at the private school, Casey and Ash selected this photograph of a pot in one of the allotment areas of the very expansive school grounds. When they're talking about it in the workshop, Casey and I asked them why they've selected this particular photograph. Casey says because it has water inside it. I don't know what it's called. Ash says it might be wee, and then laughs. I say it might be we, and Casey, joining in with the laughter, agrees and says, yeah. So my metaphorical framework, my conceptual framework, helped me to think about this interaction in terms of scatological humour and carnivalesque moments that the children were engaging in. It enabled me to think of this interaction in terms of a subversion and maybe even a resistance to what we as adults, or some people might think of as the kind of benefits of nature connection, a kind of straightforward sort of idea of an allotment as being a good place to engage with nature and in enhancing children's health and well-being. It enabled me to think about how perhaps this could be seen as the children parodying even the adult constructed benefits of nature engagement. At the state school, Fallon chose this photograph that they had taken of a cemetery that ran alongside one of the playgrounds in the state school. And when I asked them about this photograph and why they had selected this one in the workshop, Fallon said, well, this one makes me like sad happy because it shows me how many people have died. And I said, so it makes you sad because the people died, but it makes you happy because, and Fallon said, because it makes me happy because of how many people were on Earth and how many died again. So again, my conceptual framework, the starry sky metaphor, has really helped me to think about this moment in terms of thinking of it through a kind of a relational understanding of space. It made me start to think about how Fallon was thinking with the dead in this case. They were sort of subtly undoing the dead and alive binary and boundaries and the camouflage that the adults had erected around this cemetery, which was for the most part concealed from view. And it suggested that they were asserting their freedom to be with this outside space that may be very uncomfortable for the adults, the parents, the practitioners, the other people who were involved in that area, may have wanted to kind of protect the children from that. But, actually, this was something that Fallon chose to photograph, chose to speak to, and sort of asserted their own agency to be with as part of their natural outside landscape that they were inhabiting in that moment. At the play centre, not the play centre, sorry, the day nursery, which was a very, very curated, small, artificial outside space. It basically consisted of a very small garden that was entirely covered in astroturf and had no natural features at all, very what we might call nature depleted. Zand took this photograph and spoke to it in the workshop, saying, one day I want to jump up and touch the clouds. And so, again, thinking through this different framework and this metaphorical, the starry sky metaphorical framework, helped me to think about Zand's interdependence with the more than human, in this case, the clouds, the sky, envisaging their own entanglement with those clouds and how they are living as part of a wider range of what's been termed heterogeneous presences. It really helped me to refocus on the richness of Zand's life. So where I may have started out the project thinking, it's really terrible that they don't have, that Zand and their fellow children attending this little nursery didn't have access, in the nursery at least, to outside spaces. And isn't that a shame? And I mean, it is a shame, but it also helped me to look beyond that and think about look beyond this representation of space as measurable and knowable. It's an outside space that's just been astroturfed and therefore it's completely meaningless to Zand, or it's useless. Actually, there were these moments of entanglement, and Zand potentially was showing me this with this selection of this selection of this particular photograph, and speaking of wanting to sort of entangle themselves and touch the clouds. And then finally, this photograph was taken at the Play Centre, and it was selected by Rowan and Skylar. And when I asked them about this photograph, Rowan, kind of in a quite reflective moment, said, the leaves just fall down the trees. And Skylar said, I think they do fall down, leaves fall down. And Rowan said, I think they do, they fall like sideways. And Skylar says, and then bump their heads if they fall sideways. So again, as an adult, as someone looking at this through a particular kind of nature, culture, binary, you might look at this photo and just see dead leaves lying on the grass, so what? But the children in this moment, actually thinking about this through this different conceptual framework, made me think about this, how the children were using this sort of speculative, playful, what's been termed enchanted animism, whereby the leaves become more than just dead leaves lying on the floor. They become representational and discursive. They help the children to think about things, talk about things. They act on the children, the leaves, in this kind of this kind of idea. The leaves have an agency. They move from the backdrop into the common world of the children, and the children recognise the agentic potential of the leaves. You know, they're not just this dumb, dead matter lying on the floor. They fall sideways, they bump their heads, you know. So this framework really helped me to come up with these new and, to me, quite exciting, interesting, novel ideas of looking at how very young children were inter and intra-acting with natural landscapes in education and childcare. So why was it important for me to use Photovoice? You know, well, it's on one level, it sort of demonstrates, I think, the valuable nature of testimony, because I wouldn't have come to a lot of these conclusions, or even just I wouldn't have even discovered these thoughts and feelings of the children had they not had the opportunity to take those photographs themselves, and to select them themselves, and then to speak about them at length in these workshops that we did. It would have been much more driven by me. The questions would have been driven by me. The talk would have been much more driven by me and by my kind of interests and desires, you know, of what I wanted to get out of the children, in terms of what information I wanted to get out of them. It demonstrates the importance of curiosity and careful inquiry, and how this can lead to these kind of revelations and exciting discoveries, and allowed this openness to the world. Certainly from my point of view, it really opened my eyes to new ways of looking at things. It allowed me to interrogate all the multiple ways that natural spaces are constructed, inhabited and used, because it did show that the children were interacting with these spaces in a very different way to how most of the adults were imagining that they were using, or what the adults saw as being beneficial to the children was very different to what the children were actually showing and telling me. It also allowed a deep reflection on the essence of humanity as an intrinsic part of our ecosystem, and really helped me in my thesis to challenge that status quo of these purely anthropocentric constructions and benefits of nature engagement, and showed that actually there's a much richer, deeper, experiential benefit to be had there, you know, and how the children are interacting with nature in these myriad of different ways. It was also, I think, again, really important to note that it was a really joyful process, and I think the children genuinely really enjoyed taking part in this work, which was great, because I always wanted to ensure that the children would enjoy it. Because I was working with such young children, the work was conducted very soon after COVID, and after schools and nurseries were just beginning to reopen. I was very aware of not wanting to place too much of a burden on the children and also the practitioners. But the children really seem to engage with and enjoy the Photovoice process. And I've just selected a few little pictures here and quotes from the children to illustrate this. So, for example, Rowan, when speaking about this photograph about a planter filled with weeds, said, when I asked why, you know, they'd selected this particular photograph, Rowan said, because it's my special, because I like pictures. Wren taking a photograph of one of the climbing frames in their playground, got very enthusiastic when they were going through this process, and said, you know, it's to make a good viewing. Come up here, I need to show you. And they were really keen I climb up this climbing frame to have a look at the view that this climbing frame was facilitating for them. And then also, it was quite, I think some of the children found it quite funny and quite humorous. So Paige and Nico took this photograph of my hand holding the voice recorder that I used to record all of our sort of verbal interactions. Paige just giggled and said, "Oh, I like the buttons." And Nico also said, "Yeah, I like your buttons." And Paige agreed, "We both like your buttons." You know, it became a source of humor and fun for them. So I think that was a really nice part of the process as well. It was genuinely enjoyable for the children. Here are some of my selected references, and thank you very much. I'd be very happy to hear from anyone who might be interested in any future research collaborations around participatory methods, natural spaces, and childcare and education. Thank you.